watching this unprecedented move, senators do not do this to other senators. There's a certain cordiality that historically has always existed in the United States Senate, even as phony as it may happen to be in real life, but that is how they have run it up till today. I couldn't help, Linda, do you get this impression? I couldn't help watching Cory Booker. He's like, I think he thought he was on Broadway and he was giving a theatrical performance, that he thinks he's Barack Obama. He's trying to be Barack. That didn't seem like the Cory Booker, who has, by the way, a history of making up a lot of phony baloney stories about himself, which we will get to later in the program. Anyway, Carrie Severino is with us, Chief Counsel, Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. Phil Holloway is the founder of the Holloway Law Group, based in Cobb County in Georgia, my former hometown, and former prosecutor and police officer. Welcome both of you to the program. Carrie, did you get that same impression that this is Cory Booker auditioning to be the Democratic presidential nominee in 2020?
Oh, yeah. This was his dry run for his stump speech. I mean, he was trying to echo, I love what you said about him being trying to echo Obama, because he was totally doing that. He was talking about hope. He was using the arc of history language. I mean, it was a little bit egregious, particularly in light of how he actually recently sponsored legislation with Senator Sessions to give the Congressional Gold Medal to the marchers in the Selma civil rights marchers. He had all sorts of wonderful things to say about.
Well, they did that for the Selma to Montgomery marchers, the Freedom Riders. They gave it to Rosa Parks. You look at the history of him fighting for voting rights changes to help Black Americans, all the prosecutions he was involved in the Klan. I mean, he's the exact opposite of the way they tried to portray him, which we went over in great detail on Monday.
Yeah, and Booker absolutely knows it. He said he was honored to work with Sessions on legislation, but now, of course, it's not in his political interest to say that. It was really shameful. He and then several of the other members of the panel, members of Congress, Representative Cedric Richmond, actually said that because their panel was the last one of the day, it was like being sent to the back of the bus. And it was really just race baiting at its ugliest, and that was a real shame. It was, but I have to say, the final speakers was really compelling. Is William Smith, who was a former chief counsel, had worked for Senator Sessions and was so compelling. Also, a black man saying how great he was. He said the senator really crushed it, and I think that was it. These hearings overall just show that there's no question Senator Sessions is going to be confirmed as the next Attorney General.
I don't think there's any doubt about it, and it was a foregone conclusion after his testimony yesterday. I didn't think they laid a glove on him. Philip Holloway, did you get the impression he was running for president and wants to be the Democratic nominee in 2020, as I did?
Well, it sure sounded like that, Sean, and thanks for having me. And what else this sounded like is, and of course this wasn't a trial in a courtroom, but it's a legal type setting, and what you have here, and you did a wonderful job of displaying this prior inconsistent statement that he's made. And if this were a court of law on cross-examination as a witness, this is someone who would be eviscerated on cross-examination, would have zero credibility. So why he was trotted out there by the left to say these things, knowing that he's been on record, and you've got the audio that you played for the audience, is beyond me. I can't imagine why it would make any sense whatsoever. And when he wants to talk about racial division, then you can go all the way back to the very beginnings of the Obama administration, because one could easily, I think, make the argument that this divided society, if we have one now, and I think we do certainly, it's in large part due to the divisive policies of President Obama and the statements that he's made, particularly in the area of criminal justice issues that we've seen during the last 8 years.
You know, my friend Eliana Johnson, who is one of the few people that I actually like over at National Review Online, and I'm very proud of her. She once worked for me on the TV show, and she has done so extraordinarily well, and I just think the world of her. And she went on to explain this story and all these tall tales that Booker has been telling over the years that turn out not to be true. And one of the central characters in one of Booker's stories is about T-Bone. And T-Bone apparently was a drug pusher who the mayor said threatened his life at one turn and then sobbed on his shoulder the next. Well, it turns out that was a figment of his imagination, even though Booker has talked about him in very emotional terms and in great detail. And he admits he told the story a million times. The Star-Ledger picked it up, and she compiled all of this together. And look, he was a Newark City councilman and an ally. But anyway, the T-Bone story was a fixture in his stump speech, and there weren't many details. Anyway, it turns out that this whole thing everything ended up being false. That I guess this guy is so ambitious, as evidenced by breaking with Senate protocol and doing what he did earlier today. And then when he finally got caught on this, he said, well, T-Bone was actually a composite of several people he met while living in Newark. So he made him up wholesale. And anyway, when he got caught on it, and to me, I mean, I don't understand somebody that needs to prop themselves up like this. It's like padding a resume to me. What is your reaction to that, Carrie?
Yeah, well, I mean, at least Joe the Plumber actually existed. It's a good point that these guys also weren't cross-examined, because a cross-exam would have demolished all of these arguments, particularly the last one. And it's funny because I think the last panel didn't have any cross-examination, because you had those members of Congress on there, like Senator Booker, like Representative Lewis and Richmond, and they get the collegiality. They get the respect of people not cross-examining them. But you know what? They have no respect to be standing up there, and it was really frustrating listening to the kind of slander that they were saying. I understand people like Representative Lewis can give these compelling stories of working in the civil rights movement. That's amazing. But then to stand up there and suggest that a good man like Jeff Sessions is the cause of this, I mean, it is.
I mean, how do you make that case, though? How do you make that case when the guy prosecuted the Klan and was involved in the first case that actually involved civil rights and voting rights and fairness for those that were predominantly being discriminated against? How do you say that against the guy that worked to create equality? Remember the disparate sentencing laws as it related to powder and crack cocaine that disproportionately impacted black Americans, and he partnered with even Dick Durbin, for crying out loud, to get that done. Let me ask you this, if I can, Philip. So Charles Johnson, writing at the Daily Caller, gives another phony story that Cory Booker told, that he tells the story that he entered a burning building next to his own property after breaking the restraints of a police detective in order to rescue this individual, Zena Hodge, who was in a fire back in April of 2012, and it got international media attention from New York Times, CBS, ABC, Oprah, the New Jersey media. Well, it turns out that, in order to rescue Hodge, as he said, after breaking the restraints, he claims he threw Hodge over his shoulder and carried her to safety while sustaining second-degree burns on his hand. He goes on Oprah's Next Chapter to tell the legendary hostess that he had a come-to-Jesus moment in which he felt he might not survive. The only problem is, according to the people that were there, neighbors and community activists, they said, we don't believe he went in there. I don't believe he saved her. I don't believe he pulled her over his shoulder and brought her out. I mean, who makes up stories like this unless you have some type of severe, inferiority complex or some bizarre mental illness?
I tell you who makes it up, Sean. It's people who want to pad their own resume. It's people who have a certain particular agenda, in this case perhaps a political agenda, someone who wants to further their own interests at the expense of the truth. You can take a lesson from Barack Obama's playbook back in 2009 when he called the Cambridge police. They said they acted stupidly in the incident involving Professor Gates. That sort of set the tone for, I think, politicians without knowing all the facts, without being truthful about the facts, taking to their bully pulpit and saying things to the American people that are divisive in nature and that serve only to further a political agenda. And I think in the case of the Obama administration, one could make the argument that it was an intentional decision to create a racial divide, even though he wants to now claim that we are more racially unified than ever under his administration.
Let me move on if I can, and I want to ask you both about the president's. I thought this was a shameless act of self-promotion last night, and how sad it is he didn't have any real accomplishments he can speak of. And what a lot of people don't seem to understand yet in the country is within the first hours of a Trump administration, all the executive orders, because he didn't want to fight through Congress and he doesn't believe in separation of powers and co-equal branches of government, so he ruled through executive fiat. Well, the problem with governing that way is all of this will be undone in the first few hours of Donald Trump's administration. And Obamacare will be repealed and replaced at the same time, which I'm glad Donald Trump pushed for. But here is the real record, and I brought it up yesterday here, and I brought it up on TV last night. He will leave office with $20 trillion in debt. He will have accumulated more debt than every other president before him combined. His regulation paperwork is 583 million hours. His payment to Iran in the hostage deal and the bribery deal, $1.5 billion. His Criminal Aliens Act, or criminal illegal aliens released, were 86,288 just in a 2-year period from 2013 to 2015. The new federal regulations finalized since he took office, 2,988. The average increase in college costs, nearly $5,000 at 4-year public colleges. And if you're a Democrat, you lost the presidency, 13 Senate seats, 64 House seats, 13 governorships, and 33 state houses. That is not a record to be proud of. So then, is that the reason he went to the issue of race as hard as he did last night? How do you explain what he was saying about race last night when race relations got worse?
Race relations absolutely did get worse. I mentioned the incident in Cambridge. Go forward just a few years later to the incident involving Trayvon Martin. Of course, George Zimmerman was found not guilty, but before an investigation was even done, President Obama weighs in and says, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. And so he basically, time and time again, even going up to the Ferguson situation, which of course, led to widespread rioting, he says things without investigating, without knowing the facts. He creates division and then has the audacity to go on national television and say that race relations under his administration are much better than they have been in, I think, 20 years is what he said to George Stephanopoulos just a couple of days ago. So it just defies all credibility. And then you could even talk about, you listed a long laundry list of mine, and I was trying to keep up. I've got a list that includes most of that, but you've got the Bo Bergdahl situation, swapping for the Taliban 5, and all sorts of other things. He's alienating.
Well, I haven't even mentioned Iran and China and North Korea and the Russian reset in Benghazi and Egypt and Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. I mean, there's not a single place in the world that's better off. But I've got to let you both go, Carrie. Thank you, Philip. Thank you. We appreciate it. News Roundup and Information Overload.